Welcome back to NBL Now for your Wednesday morning, and I'm very excited for the guests we have on today because I've waited for the pinnacle, and that is the finals basketball to get the big dog on. Andrew Bogut joins me on NBL Now. Bogues, thanks so much for jumping on.
No worries.
Now, it's been a week removed since the end of the season for the Sydney Kings. We could chat about a lot. We could do this for hours, but we've got a short little period here. Let's start with the Sydney Kings before we get on to a semi-finals preview. Now that you've had a week to, I guess, recap and sit down, take a breath, how do you summarise the season as a whole?
Well, look, whenever you don't, my mentality is whenever you don't win and there's only one team that wins, I wouldn't say it's a failure, but you got to look to what went wrong. I think our season fifth was probably lower than we thought we should have finished, the way things, or sixth technically, with the way things went. So we're back to the drawing board. We got to reestablish what we're about, what we think is going to help us moving forward. Obviously, it was gorgeous. The coaching staff's first year together. Some of the squad was inherited, some of it wasn't. So we got to make sure that we get that right in the off season. The reports that the media had, there was some cultural issues. That's not me saying that. That's what was out there in the media. So we want to kind of address that a little bit as well and make sure that we, have the right guys in the locker room as well that are that goes with the imports as well. I think, imports battled for the most part and a little bit up and down with Jalen, and then same with Cam. But, Paul Smith always calls it the import lottery. If you get that right, you're halfway there to being successful. Most of the teams that are good have good imports, so we got to get that right. Tui's obviously probably going to go to the NBA now, and we're going to lose some pieces here and there. So we just got to revamp and build and get some continuity. The other hard thing in the NBL is getting continuity year in, year out. Short-term contracts in the NBL, guys are ever rarely on longer than 3-year contracts. Factor in next stars that move on quickly. Factor in imports that are usually on 1-year deals. You don't get a lot of continuity to build a team together. Whereas you see like a team like Melbourne United right now, they are an older team. They probably aren't as young and vibrant, but they've been together for a while. And I think that pays dividends for them continuously making the top 4 every season.
Now, you've played basketball at the highest level all around the world. Now transitioning into the later part after retiring, how important is it to wait until after the season where you can take a deep breath and really look back at the whole season as a whole rather than deal with maybe the heightened emotions of trying to figure it out in season while also understanding we've got to win games as well? We can't do too much in season. Let's just take a deep breath and look at all these little pieces we can improve on.
Yeah, look, I think the off-season changes, adjustments, issues are all noted throughout the season. You're right. In season, it's very hard to fix major problems. You just can't do it. So it's about taking mental notes and actually writing down things throughout November, December, January. What was good, what was bad, what can we improve on, what's our Achilles heel. So, you'd be a silly team to wait till the exit interviews to try to, note all that down. I think most smart teams are already noting that stuff down during the regular season. Then you obviously talk to coaches and players one-on-one in their exit interviews and probably get some gems there. Both good and bad and ugly. You want to get it as honest as you can, which sometimes can hurt your feelings, but that's what you want. And then you kind of revamp and try to figure out, how do we address this? How do we address this? Why is this not right? Are our systems good in place on a day-to-day basis? Are our guys getting what they need? Is the rehab good? Is the physio good? Is the doctor good? Like, there's a lot of things that go on in a professional sporting organization to try and keep, athletes both physically fit and mentally. As you've been in the grind of a season. If players are stressed about things off the court, it can often reflect their performance on the court. So it's a mix of things, and we've noted those down. We've already addressed a bunch of issues that we think we can fix, and it's a matter of going out there and trying to fix those things.
It's funny, fans will never truly understand. There's no such thing as an off-season in terms of how much it ramps up once the games stop. But some other big news around, I guess, Sydney and basketball. There's been reports of a second Sydney team potentially in the near future. We've seen the incredible fan base that the Kings have always had, but the way that Kudos Bank Arena continues to be packed out, all the loyal supporters that want to rock up every single game. When you think about a second Sydney team and what you're trying to build in Sydney and really basketball as a whole, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Look, if it's a genuine team, we welcome it. We want another team in Sydney. We want a rivalry. We want to bring that back to the West Sydney versus Sydney days. They were in those in-city rivalries. The closest thing we get is the in-state rivalry with Wollongong, which is a big one. If we can get another one of those across town, would be sensational. The rumours being that it might be a next star team. Not a huge fan of that, to be honest with you. I think it's it's a team that will not win very many games. Young guys trying to find their way professionally. You need some leadership in that locker room. So I don't know how they balance that out. And I don't think it's going to draw that much of a fan. I just don't know how you build a fan base with a next star team that's literally got genuinely 8 or 9 new faces every season. It's going to be pretty hard to build a crowd out of that. I know it wouldn't be about that if it's a next star team, but personally, from an ownership point of view and a selfish point of view, I'd rather a proper NBL team that we can go to battle in, 4 times a year. I think that would be sensational.
I'm all for continuing to build rivalries. I love it. We see it, and it could potentially be that rivalry in a championship series with Melbourne and Southeast Melbourne. But I was listening to your podcast, Rogue Bows podcast, and you were talking a little bit towards the end about obviously the news of Taran Armstrong, who signed with the Golden State Warriors, a place that you're very familiar with, and you had some nice things to say. But as a whole, I guess the NBA eyes, no one's more connected to NBA circles than you. This probably speaks to the volumes of how many different eyes and GMs or whoever it is watching NBL games, not just for next stars, throughout a whole season, to be able to jump in and sign a 2A after an NBL season. The league feels like it's in a great spot, but especially young talent like Taran Armstrong.
Yeah, for sure. I think, back when I was playing and I went over after my first year, I didn't really lose a step going into that NBA run that I went on. And I think, teams have seen that now, that this league in the NBL is very, very competitive. And guys can transition pretty well into being decent role players or establishing a role in the NBA. And I think it's we've seen a bunch of guys, obviously, from here in the Next Star program with the Arc Porties of the world and whatnot, also play valuable roles over here and then go over and play valuable roles for their team. So it's great that they're looking at this part of the world as something that probably we're not used to over the last decade. But the last 5 years now, it's really started to become a common practice where you can find some genuine role players over here. So, I mean, Taran, I think, will have an opportunity. I don't know how much of an opportunity early on, but even just at a 2A level, I think it's just sitting there. There's going to be injuries at some point. There's going to be, I think Golden State doesn't really have a pure point at the moment. Steph's a gunner, shooter point guard, scoring point guard, whereas I think Taran can definitely come in there sometimes towards the end of the season when they've got some injuries and really create for them off the pick and roll, which is something they probably don't have. They're a bit more of a scoring open floor team. So it will be interesting to see how they use him, how it all goes. But, couldn't be happier for another NBL player. Like, even though I'm an owner of another team, I love it whenever someone from Australia or the NBL or even college route gets to the NBA. It's sensational for our game.
It's awesome to see, and it's continuing to build and build each and every year. Before we get into a semi-final preview, because I want to break that down with you, there's no brighter basketball mind than yourself. You did mention as well on your podcast, and you're talking about the coaching changes in the NBL next year, and you mentioned the Brisbane coaching change. We've heard some rumours about some big names, Chase Buford, who obviously you'd be familiar with as a leading candidate. But you also said how the Bullets are a sleeping giant in the NBL. When you've been there, you were commentating games this year. What did you mean by that? And I guess the idea of all these big names potentially coming back to coach in the NBL, it's great for the league.
Yeah, I just think Brisbane hasn't had a lot of success over the last 4 or 5 years. So, and the fans, I remember going to a game in Nissan Arena a couple of seasons ago with my wife, and it was when the Kings played Brisbane, took our kids up, and it was a game that Sydney won by 50. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah,
and it was sold out in Nissan Arena, but what amazed me with the Brisbane fans was they stayed till the end. No one left early. And even my wife, doesn't know a whole lot about basketball, but as we were walking out, like, the fans were like happy. Not happy they lost, but they were like, we got to see basketball. She's like, this is really strange. Like, they genuinely like being here. They lost by 50. So my point is, imagine they had a product that was competitive on a yearly basis. I just think the sky's the limit for them, especially now moving to a bigger arena. They had 8,000 a couple of times, and they weren't performing that well. So you think if they get some sort of consistency about being just getting some continuity with coaching, with players, and getting it together where they consistently are top 4, top 5, top 6, I think they have a really good chance to draw 10,000 fans there, especially with the little push they're going to get from the Olympics with some facilities maybe down the line. And I think it's getting there. Basketball up in Queensland is booming. There's a huge facility shortage, like much of Australia, actually, which, shout out to our politicians, build more basketball stadiums. But we need more facilities because the participation rate in most states, even Victoria, which is ahead of most states' facilities, participation is far exceeding available facilities. So you never want to see kids locked out of being able to play basketball at their local association.
It's spot on, exactly. And it's great to see so many kids picking up a basketball because we want to see these guys in the NBL and in the NBL one day, and women, of course. Now, talking about a semi-final preview, starts with Melbourne versus Perth. I want to ask you this off the top, Bogues. We've seen an offensive explosion in the NBL this year. And historically speaking, especially when it gets to finals, the defense is going to lead the charge. Do you think that's going to hold weight here in both series? Do you think that whoever can really lock up defensively, or are we going to see an offensive team go all the way like the Perth Wildcats?
Well, if it's a lock-up series, it favours Melbourne. I think, Melbourne have guards and the defensive players to kind of try to limit Bryce. Look, you're not going to stop Bryce. You're just going to try to make Bryce score his 30 at 30% if you can, and you're probably going to win that game. If it becomes a defensive grind, I favour Melbourne, but I think Melbourne, it's strange. So during this season, every team's had a bogey team. For the Kings, it was Adelaide. For Illawarra, it was Adelaide. Then you look at, for Perth, it was Melbourne. Melbourne just always seem to find a way against Perth, especially in Perth. It's really strange. I wouldn't be surprised if Melbourne win this series, and I'm probably going to tip Melbourne just based on that I think the NBL playoffs, the whistle will be swallowed a little bit more. Physicality will go up, and that heavily favours Melbourne. You'll see John really going even crazier on the sidelines if that happens, so that'll be fun to watch as well. But I think that's going to be I think this series is going to be predicated on how the whistle goes. If they let Ely, Delhi be physical like they normally are, and it's not a tight whistle, I think it really favours Melbourne. If it's a tighter whistle, we know Bryce, for all his scoring prowess, he does get a pretty good whistle. You really can't touch him, but for some reason that balances out when you got Melbourne. So it's going to be a very, very interesting series from that point of view. But it's going to be, I think Doolittle is almost as important as Bryce for that team. I think Bryce provides all the scoring and all the highlight stuff, but you look at what Doolittle does for them when they need a bucket, when they need to slow down and get things done. He guards 1 through 5. He's physical, he's strong. A lot of guys have noted how strong the guy is. Like, he's a piece that people have spoken about, but I don't think people realize if you take him out of that lineup, I don't think they're at the point they are. And I think he's so valuable for them. Pinder's also a needle mover. He's kind of inconsistent, but when he has those nights, Doolittle does what he does. Bryce has a decent scoring night, and Pinder provides that complementary piece as a third option. They're probably going to win that game. So, yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun series to watch.
Can't wait for that one. You mentioned part of history. 17 of the last 22 that Melbourne United have won. So there's something in there.
Yeah.
You don't want to read too much into it if you're Perth, but they're always going to be fun to watch in the finals. The other one, you mentioned the Hawks versus Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. Phoenix 2-1 on the regular season. Does that play into it at all? Or do they kind of put all that out the window, understanding that this is a different ball game when it comes to a 3-game series? Yeah,
it is. Look, I think Illawarra were on double game weekends. I think they lost one of those games, I believe. So I wouldn't read too much into that. If it was a heavy sweep like the Adelaide, I can tell you that the Illawarra were happy that Adelaide got taken out of that game. I can tell you that much. At halftime, they were probably like, "Oh, here we go. We're going to be a 1 seed that's going to struggle against the 4." But Southeast Melbourne, interesting. I mean, their whole thing is just consistency throughout games. It's kind of like Sydney in a way. They'll have a quarter that's elite, and then they'll have a quarter that's poor. Their best, they can beat anybody. They just haven't been able to sustain consistently over the course of games, 1 through 4 quarters. If they can just be at that above average level consistently, I really think they got a chance. But I just think Illawarra's depth for me is what gets them over the line. A very well coached team, but they have so many multiple lineups they can go to. They have big lineups, they have small lineups, they have scoring guards, they have scoring bigs. Veterans off the bench like a Blanchfield that can come in and, like we saw the other night, 5-3. Like they're really, really well balanced and they can go super deep. Whereas Southeast Melbourne are a bit more limited with what they can do. The big thing in this series to me is Walton Jr. and his health. It's been reported that he's going to play. King has said, I'm just going to put it out there, he's going to play. I don't know if he's trying to talk it into existence or if it's really going to happen. And you're going to wonder how limited he's going to be. He's a quick burst guy coming off a hammy. You always have to be careful there, but if he's in the lineup, I think it gives them a little bit of a boost. So I think it'll be 2-1, and I think home court will prevail.
Home court normally does, and we've seen some packed out crowds, especially at the Wynn Entertainment Centre. Bogue, before I let you go, as I said, there's not many who understand and know the ins and outs of the game more than you. looking towards next year, what improvements would you like to see the NBL make?
I think just continuing on the trajectory it's going. I think that my thing is, just got to be careful with putting in too many different things. Summer shootout, hoops fest, Litz, rumors of an all-star game eventually. Like, you just got to be careful that there's not too much. And I know what the NBL is trying to do. They're trying to throw on darts at a dartboard, trying to see which one sticks. And, oh shit, this one worked. Let's just stay with that one. But I think what Hoop Fest did last season was it kind of diluted the Blitz. And I think the Blitz to me has become a very, very good product. It's a very, very well-run thing that a lot of time and resources were put into. But I think last year's Blitz wasn't as good as the ones previously by far, because I think a lot of the time the effort was going into Hoop Fest. So my point is, just got to be careful we don't bring things in and forget about what was doing well. Just because something is doing well doesn't mean we can just park it and let that. We want to keep building on that. And it was, look, to be honest, there were scouts and numerous people that said this was one of the worst blitzes I've been to in the last 4 or 5 years. And that's not a knock, because it was really, really high bar before that. Like the Gold Coast one 2 years ago was sensational. Last year was a bit bare bones. And I think that was because the NBL was obviously focusing a lot of time and resources on Hoop Fest, which was going to be the first one, right? So that's my only thing. It's just like, let's not try to reinvent the wheel too much. We want to try new things. We want to be innovative. Like NBL still has a lot of things that are very innovative. Being in coaches' timeouts live, those kind of things. Only other one I like to see, which isn't really an in-season thing, is just let's bring in some trades. Let's bring in some trades. I would just love to see if we could, figure that out. Now, Australian employment law makes it very, very tricky, but I think it's something that would just create so much talking points, so much fighting between fans, so much hypotheticals. Trade machines would fire up. We see what the NBA did. Obviously the Luka trade is an anomaly, but the amount of tension that got for 10 days, man, I would argue like that trade period, not argue, I think it's fact, the hits and eyeballs that got would be more than in the NBA finals. It just, every man and his dog's talking about it. You got people talking about it that don't even follow basketball. How did they trade that Luka guy? And you're like, I didn't even know you followed basketball, buddy, So I'd love to see that in the NBL somehow if we can figure out a way. So ABPA, come on. Have a discussion with the NBL. Let's figure it out. And I think it can benefit both sides. It's not necessarily just teams getting rid of guys. There's guys that are stuck on a bench that, like, hey, we don't have a role for you with this team. Cool, can you try to trade me? No worries, let's figure something out. They're the kind of things we want to try to do.
We talk about that every year, and again, I think it lends more so how the play-in tournament, I think, has been a really big success, because you've got a team like the Phoenix who started 0-5. If they've just got to try and get to a top 4, even though they did, mentally it becomes a lot harder when you're just going for the top 6. But I like it for the sake of Cairns Taipans, who they're a small market team. They really struggle with injuries. To be able to go out there and say, what can we do to get one of those end-of-the-bench players just to come in and kind of help lead us back to getting competitive? I really think there is a place for it. It might be tricky to work out, but we're going to keep pushing that.
Yeah, I mean, like, cost of living is a big one. Like, if you're getting traded from Cairns to if you're on 100K or 80K, you get traded from Cairns to Sydney. That's basically your rent all gone. So there are some levers we've got to figure out. But there's an easy way to do that. You give a top up for cost of living or whatever it is if you go to a big market. But yeah, we definitely want. I think it's that next step that'll just give so much free news time to the NBL. And I just think it'd be really cool. And you can put a limit on it. You can put a time limit on it, 2 players per year max, whatever it is. But I think there's a lot of players that it can benefit. And every now and then it'll be a player that probably will be pissed off about it, but that's part of the business. But I think it'd be really unique. And that's what the NBA has that many leagues in the world don't. They just, it just makes things so much better.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of potential trades, what could have gone down the last few years and how they would have worked out. Mate, thank you so much for jumping on. Good luck for everything in the off season. I'm sure we'll chat soon.
All right, mate. Cheers.